Welcome everyone to this week's HRL lunch break on quantifying HR credibility. My name is Heather Maria Kubik. I'm the Assistant Business Manager here at HR Logistics, and I will be facilitating the webinar today. So if you have any questions or thoughts, please feel free to share them using the chat or the question box, and I will go ahead and ask our speaker directly. Also, we will be recording this webinar, so the information will be available for those that couldn't join us, or in case you'd like to reference the discussion later on. And now a brief introduction of our speaker for those of you joining us for the first time. Christy Evans is CEO Thought Leader here at HR Logistics, and as an HR practitioner turned entrepreneur, she provides a unique insight on how HR can strategically support business needs. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Christy.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Heather, and thanks for attending another of HRL's lunch breaks. We hope you find the information we talk about in our lunch break thought-provoking. We hope that you find it informative and useful in your day-to-day work. Here at HRL, we practice thought leadership in both theory and application. When we are working with our clients, we are always trying to consider how the work aligns with the organizational goals and how we can partner with our client to develop their definition of success, including the ability to measure that success through analytics and KPIs or key performance indicators. And finally, how to organize, manage, and execute the project to ensure success. This is, in our view, the application of human risk management. And our experiences in application then feed our thought leadership in the theory of human risk management and the continuing development of how workforce management and development can be more strategically aligned through the blended use of business analytics and human capital management principles. Today we're going to talk a little bit about credibility. And credibility really affects everything, doesn't it? As a professional, you gain credibility through your professional career, a path that represents your growth and experience and your ability to understand, handle, and manage increasingly complex responsibilities. When you buy a car, you consider the credibility and reputation of the maker as you make your decision. When you are shopping for services from a vendor, you consider the vendor's reputation, their experience in providing services, and their credibility with your peers and their customers. So we are constantly considering credibility, aren't we? In fact, you are even considering credibility when that certain family member tells you they will be at the Thanksgiving dinner on time and you know they are always late, right? This is a recent survey that you see on your screen conducted on LinkedIn by Anil Arora of Castroy Services. The survey received 507 votes, of which 206 of those voted yes or yes but. This indicates there is a huge credibility gap to me for human capital management. It also validates that it continues to be a struggle for HR to be seen as useful and strategic. So we're going to look at some ways today where we can try to change that. You know, of those who voted that HR managers are a waste of money, they're largely composed of C-level executives, VPs, and owners. And the survey breaks it down into these demographics. The data indicates that HR still has serious credibility issues with the executive team, and any project or business initiative will be challenged. So doing the research and legwork to justify an HR project is a critical need. And part of that is what we'll discuss today. What is credibility exactly? Let's consider that family member who is late. What is their reputation for tardiness? We are social animals and often want to know what others think. Are they late for everything, or is it only certain people or events? Does every family member find them to be late for every event? Are they late for work, or are they only late for social events? The history of activity is another indicator. What is their history? How often are they late to a function? And then how committed are they to the family event? Do they participate, share responsibilities, always show up, even if late? So we do think about credibility a lot in our day-to-day lives. We're always sort of gauging and judging whether or not this is a reputable resource or a credible resource. Now let's take that example and let's change it to where we think about it from a business perspective. What is credibility when it's defined as a business perception? Reputation then maybe is a measure of quality of service and the relevance of the product or service to our needs. In other words, how good is it and how much does it meet my needs? History becomes the experience of the recipient of activity. I know that kind of sounds, complicated, but it's basically, what's the history of satisfaction? How well does it satisfy the needs? What are the experiences of people who have received this product or service? Is it consistent? Is it reliable? And then commitment becomes the effort made to execute well and be accountable for results. Holding oneself accountable for results means those results have been defined as a set of expectations and are therefore replicable, i.e. can be repeated over and over and over again because they have a consistency and reliability to them. The measurement doesn't change very much. You can replicate it over time. As we begin to see a broader picture of how credibility is applied to our professional lives, you can see that credibility is achieved over time. Neither relevance, reliability, or replication can be achieved with a short-term vision. You have to think long-term because you need to see it happen, as the recipient of that. You need to see it happen over and over and over again in order to build that reputation. So they all work kind of hand in hand. And when you're thinking about these things, let's think about each piece individually. So what is the context of your measurements or your process? What makes the measurement relevant to your organization? Is your turnover rate consistent with other organizations in your industry? Are you part of initial conversations with business units and departments and executives, when business strategy is developed? By focusing on relevance, we start to think about the context of the metric or practice and how it applies to the organization. What does it do or measure, and why is it important? What makes it relevant to your organization? If I'm in the business of making pies, how does this measurement or process help HR help me make pies, or make pies better, or make pies less expensively, or make pies faster, or sell pies, or open a second pie store? It's about how relevant that process or measurement is. What impact does this metric or process have on my business? With HR, sometimes these can be challenging to define, but it's not impossible. Not impossible because if you understand the business deeply enough, you can find the impact. And if you can't find the impact, you have to question the relevance of the measurement or process. Is it time or money wasted? And why is reliability important? Well, HR has a history, and let's be honest about that, of not being strategic and of having more soft skills than hard skills. In other words, more people skills than business skills. In business, more credibility is given to hard skills, measurements, numbers, dollars, etc. So the absence of these skills in human capital management has created a history of HR being unreliable for all of these reasons. That perception is reinforced by inconsistency. How many times have you seen the calculation used to measure turnover change? From month to month, from quarter to quarter? And how many times, when it does, are the reasons for the changes documented or substantiated against changes in the business environment? And how often does the headcount differ between HR and finance, and the reason is unknown? So this list that you see before you is really a call to action, an opportunity, because one of the reasons that hard skills are more respected is because they're more objective. To change that perception and the impact of credibility, you have to address these things by creating a history or new history of consistency and reliability. And therein lies the really key that you need to pay attention to, because we mentioned that it happens over time, and that's how history gets developed. It is history over time. So if you have defined metrics that are relevant, now you have to be consistent about how they are measured in order to ensure their reliability, because that is built over repeated use. If the method of measurement changes from month to month or each quarter, then relevance is gone because there's no ability to see a pattern or a trend that tells you the story. It is the relationship between the measurement or process and the business that creates the relevance. And so that ability to build upon that each time you measure is what gives you the reliability factor, and the history is created. Can you stay the course? Well, changing or building your credibility requires commitment to providing quality results over a long time frame. And so it is not a short-term vision, and it can be a bit daunting. In our example of the late family member, one instance of showing up on time to the family dinner does not eliminate that person's reputation for being late, right? So the third tool for improving your credibility requires more effort because you are challenged to ensure projects, metrics, and services are aligned with the business stakeholders' needs. Maintain the standard by doing the job well, executing the process well, over and over, holding yourself accountable to those results, even when other projects or demands are screaming for your time and attention. And use a process, methodology, or calculation that can be replicated with each cycle without significant variation. This begins the process of building historical correlations so that you can see the story as it unfolds over time, which increases its relevance to the organization. Several years ago, I read a book that was about women who were starting to use technical analysis on Wall Street. And many years ago, technical analysis was not really seen as the way to do economic predictions. It was seen as a tool, but it was not the tool of choice. It was sort of that behind-the-scenes kind of thing. Well, what had started to happen was that there were certain people on Wall Street that were really starting to get into the technology, really starting to get into the technical aspect of it, and they were using correlations between metrics and what they saw happening in the economy to predict what the future would hold for the economy, either short-term or long-term. And the effectiveness of using that technical analysis to predict historical events and to predict future events over time began to really be recognized as something that had real strength. And now when you look at economic news and you look at everybody watching the economic indicators like the job results, which came out this morning, and other economic indicators, you really start to see that technical analysis and the ability to look at metrics over a period of time can show you what is going on or give you an idea of what is going on. It's not written in stone, it's not black and white, but it gives you an idea of what's happening behind the scenes. But we did talk about the long-term vision that is part of this process. So before you commit, it's important to ask yourself a couple of questions. What's the current state of my credibility? Because you want to know what that is and how you can use the 3 R's, relevance, reliability, and replication, to improve credibility. Because this path requires a bit of a commitment and a long-term vision to rebuild. So before you commit, you might want yourself or your organization to ask these 2 questions. The length of your path to stronger credibility is directly correlated to your current state. If it's poor, the path is longer. If it is good or strong, this path will further enhance it. But before you commit, you should know what you're committing to, because this will impact your ability to succeed with consistency and execution. You may also want to consider some of the impacts to credibility we have listed here. Some of these scenarios indicate a short-term impact, but some can be more systemic. Correcting a short-term impact is faster and easier in general than correcting a systemic issue. So identifying the reasons that are driving the goal to improve credibility helps the execution of this initiative. And you want your execution to be the first visible representation of your improved credibility, because it will really put you out there in the spotlight. So when you want to evaluate your credibility, once you've committed to the path, it's important to know where you are starting from, and there are ways to evaluate your brand or your reputation. If you're starting from a position of weakness, then your efforts to measure your current state of credibility need to be more objective, because how you measure your credibility will have an immediate impact on your reputation. Your stakeholders and customers will be looking at you to see if you are really serious, or if this is just another project that looks good but has no real commitment to change. This can be difficult. You will hear things that you don't agree with, and things that you don't really want to hear. I have worked with clients who have been in that position and been brave enough to walk out there and say, okay, I know that we can do a better job. Help us figure out how. And that was exactly what happened. They got information that was good, but they also got some information that surprised them. And that's a challenge to deal with. You have to open yourself up to that. Your commitment will be tested, and the choice you make on continuing the path will be very visible to your constituents. So if you're starting from a position of strength, though, you have a little more license, because you've already built a bit of that foundation. You have a little bit of foundation that you can springboard off of, and you can still want to ensure that you maintain your credibility through the strong analysis process. Because you're already starting from a strong foundation, though, you don't want to move backwards. You don't want to deter from that. You want to improve that and continue to snowball on that. So one of the things that we want to think about is how do you measure that? How do you start that process? So we can set the stage for our study now. Most of us are going to be in a position of weak credibility based on the survey that we looked at the beginning. But that may not be the situation for you, so consider it with a grain of salt. That means that your efforts to conduct the research will be so closely scrutinized. You'll really be under the spotlight. First of all, to increase credibility, you have to embrace the truth, even if it is painful. This means that the function has to open itself up to the criticism by asking questions of many different stakeholders: customers, business units, vendors, finance, IT, operations, all of these stakeholders. To increase the objectivity, it requires a 360-degree performance review of the department or of yourself and of what makes you relevant to the business, just as we have done with employees. So we must do this with ourselves, with the business function. And having an external facilitator could be a valuable tool, either as an external consultant or someone from a department that operates in a more objective function, some way to increase the objectivity and the perception that is a positive perception by your stakeholders. It can be advantageous to ensure that information is not discounted or avoided. Sometimes, when we don't want to hear something, we might not hear that comment that was made because we don't really want to address that situation. Or if you don't have someone who is more objective in the conversation, people may not be as open to opening up about issues or problems or things that they need or things that they want to measure. So using an internal resource is possible, but care should be given to the person and their relationship to the results, the ability to maintain objectivity and their own credibility. So considering why you are embarking on this initiative is important because it should influence how you structure the process. For example, if you are embarking on measuring your credibility because of complaints, you want to be sure to speak with those who are complaining. Are the complaints coming from your customers or your staff or both? Are vendors part of the problem? How can you validate exactly what the complaints are and how consistent they are? What are the variables that might be causing or impacting the complaints, for example? If you are changing health insurance carriers, are the complaints around this change? Understanding what is driving the initiative to improve your credibility also helps you define KPIs or key performance indicators which help you measure success. You want to create a process that creates a snowball effect continuously as you execute the path forward so that you improve credibility all along the way and each step builds upon the next, or builds upon the one before it rather. Each success builds upon the one before it, and by creating KPIs that document those successes, you have proof of the results of the initiative and an ROI that helps you ensure you are on the right path, delivering information and results to your stakeholders that meets their needs. Consider the description of operational processes and how well it meets your customers' needs. A lot of times we create a process and then it works pretty well for a while, but then it starts to become inefficient. It starts to unravel a bit. Look for those patterns, bottlenecks, poor communication, errors, confusion, those kinds of things from your stakeholders. Look for correlations in your measurements and your processes across functional areas and stakeholders. Are you hearing the same issue from multiple sources? Do your measurements that you've developed or that you want to develop, are they going to measure the relevance of the function? Are they going to measure the reliability of the function? Think about it in those terms of the 3 R's. How are you going to be able to measure how well the functional area or the process or the metric is actually performing for your stakeholders? Now, considering that you may be starting from a position of weakness, you want to emphasize the objectivity. You want to be credible. Your credibility is not served by continuing to do things that don't have clear value to your stakeholders and or the business. If you are continuing processes that are inefficient, then you're continuing processes that are wasting valuable resources. You may not have the same value that you thought you had in the very beginning. When working with a client, invariably we find processes that are no longer needed or have changed, and not everyone is aware of the change. The best process or measurement is the one that has just been created, because at that point in time it is the most efficient use of resources or the most accurate measurement. But change is inevitable, and metrics and processes are in a constant state of change as well. The thing is, we don't see it because the external side, the side that is communicated or the output rather, is often left in place for a long time, but the change is happening behind the scenes nonetheless on the input side, where changes in personnel, expenses, budget, data entry, automation, timing, and other things are happening. So without constant monitoring, and I don't mean you look at it every day, but you look at it periodically, the value of the process or the metric changes and we don't realize it until the results become so unreliable, it is obvious. That also has an impact on your credibility because eventually somebody's going to notice that that metric or that process is not working, maybe several people. And if you're not the first one to pay attention to it, then it's going to look like you're not paying attention at all. So you can take the information that you learn from your stakeholders and you can use it as an opportunity to increase your credibility through collaboration with them. Discuss what is working and what isn't. Do you have processes that are no longer relevant? Do you have processes that are unreliable? You can begin improving your credibility immediately by how you execute the evaluation process. How willing are you to listen to your stakeholders' needs, and how willing are you to create methods of measurement that hold you accountable? How to change? And by considering measurements that can be used to assess the current state and ROI on the future state, i.e. what we're doing today and then what we're going to do to improve our processes, then you're really kind of saying, okay, I accept that this is my role, I accept that this is my responsibility to meet your needs, to meet the needs of the stakeholders, and I accept that I'm going to be held accountable. And I think that one of the things that happens with HR is that often with human capital management processes, we create the process, but we don't have a KPI in place to really reflect our value. And what happens with that is because there's nothing there that's concrete, there's no concrete number or measurement there, then everything that reflects our value is subjective in nature. It's a description. There's no quantifiable number that's objective. These are some of the examples of things that we've considered that could be created for an organization so that you can think about how am I really making sure that I'm providing value for the dollars that are invested in this department. What measurements can you use? Well, consider how well a measurement can be used to continuously measure ROI and value of change. And when you think about value, don't think about value from the perspective of how much it costs. Think about value from the perspective of what does the organization need? How does this support, making pies better, making them less expensive, creating a new store? Understand what the business is, how the business makes money, because that's just like you making money. It's a revenue stream. And so consider how that measurement or that process is supporting that business and make sure it's aligned. That is critically important for the credibility of HR, to be able to speak to that and to say to someone when you're having a one-off conversation, this is how we make a difference. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Heather to see if we have any questions.
Great. Thank you, Christy. I do actually have one question that came in. You talk a lot about consistency, but business is always changing. So how do you adjust for that?
Well, that's a very good question. I think that consistency is something that's very important to building credibility, but relevance requires us to look at the changing environment in which we operate. So I think if we make sure that our processes are consistent, our delivery and execution and accountability are consistent, and then we make sure that the reliability of the measurement is consistent. It's not arbitrarily changed. It's not changed without some thought process. It's not, it goes through a process of saying, okay, this makes sense to change because of these factors. Then I think that we have to adjust for relevance because that relevance will change. As you said, the business environment changes very quickly, changes frequently. That's one of the challenges and one of the terrific things that keeps us all interested. But in order to do that, you have to say, okay, this is where I'm operating now. It's not the same environment. People operating in the .com boom are in a different environment today. they can't operate quite the same way. So you do have to adjust, and I think that that's the key to make sure that you continue to push towards aligning with what the business goals are and making sure the process or the metric is relevant.
So ultimately, it's adjusting for the needs of the organization as long as the change is supported by what the organization needs.
Right, right. It really is.
Great. Well, we had actually one more question come in as well. It's a couple sentences here. I'm currently working on a project where my colleague doesn't really understand the value in building credibility through reliable and relevant data. It's a new initiative within the organization, and we are trying to get senior level approval. What do you do when you are working with someone who just doesn't seem to get it, to put it to put it nicely? How can I introduce this idea to them?
Well, I think that's also a very good question, because a lot of times in the very beginning especially, you are having to redirect resources into establishing the framework for finding out what your current state is, finding out how things are happening currently, what your credibility is with your stakeholders. And so it becomes kind of, how do you get the resources reallocated to this initiative? And so it becomes a bit of a political battle and a bit of a resource battle, especially when there's no ROI there, and it's much more difficult to I think, sell an ROI on an idea that is has a long-term value associated with it, requires some amount of effort to actually start the framework and then build upon the framework and kind of get that process consistently running where you're getting these metrics out there. And then the projected ROI is sort of nebulous, it's a little vague. I think the way you get started is a couple of different things. Having conversations with your stakeholders about what their needs are and whether their needs are being met. And of course, you got to be careful with that, because depending on where you are in the organization and what the hierarchy is and responsibilities, you have to be careful about broaching that question. But that's one way to find out how well you're meeting your stakeholders' needs. Secondarily, I think you can also do some benchmarking with other organizations that have walked down this path and start to look for, okay, what kinds of processes did they go through? How did they get the project sold in the beginning? Did they need any additional software or tools that help them do the analysis? How did they get started with building relevance? And answering some of those questions and seeing if you can talk to other organizations that have an ROI already built and can see the results. It becomes much easier for you to document that there really is value to be had here. And this is where the ROI comes back to the organization, and that's what these organizations have seen. So you also validate it out on the market.
Great, thank you. Well, we are just about to run out of time, so we'll just go ahead and wrap up here. If we can move on to the last slide of the PowerPoint. Our next lunch break is December 8th. The topic is Project Management for HR Projects, the planning process. So we'll continue our HR project story from the last lunch break into the second step, the planning process. So we hope you can join us. As always, we invite you to join the Human Risk Management Learning community through our monthly newsletter. Please let me know if you'd like to be added if you're not already on there. Thanks again for attending. We hope you found this session valuable. And right when I close the webinar, you will receive a short survey. So if you could please take a few minutes just to give us your feedback and let us know what you think. We would greatly appreciate your thoughts. Thanks again for attending, and we'll see you all next time. Have a great day.
Happy